Hi everybody and welcome to another Founder and Friends. Today I'm joined by Kyra Abbu.
Hi everybody.
Yep, welcome. Kyra first worked with us through Raygun in her prior work and is now in a new role, but we wanted to have a bit of a chat because the work we did previously was amazing. You made that engagement work so well.
Aww.
It was one of those true times of feeling like a partnership, not a sales situation. But before we dive into some of the details about both acquiring software, making sure it's getting used, and all of that sort of stuff, tell me a little bit about how did you even get into technology?
Yeah.
What was your pathway?
I appreciate you for saying that. I felt the same way. My journey to technology is, I would say, it was always in the back of my head, but I never had a push to do it, or I didn't know even existed. So I was born and raised in the Philippines, which is not that far from New Zealand, actually. So I was there until I was 13, and my family had a family business there, and unfortunately, it went bankrupt. So when I was going through high school in New Jersey, I was still doing business, and that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go back to Philippines and get our company back up. But on the side, everything I enjoyed was because of my dad's childhood frustration. So my dad really wanted to get into technology, and it was just not something he could do in the Philippines. My whole life, he exposed me to technology. I would be like jailbreaking people's phones. don't, I didn't say that. Or I would be burning CDs and like all of these things when I was a kid. I moved to the US and I was still kind of craving that technology aspect and like going to the library and teaching kids how to code. For some reason at that point, I managed to learn how to learn Python in high school, and just my dad was so encouraging.
Similar-ish. My dad was very supportive of, he always sort of talked about wanting to embrace new technologies and feeling like the moment you stopped embracing new technologies, it's like game over. And so he was both my parents were very supportive growing up. And we had a family business as well, so kind of had that intersection of business and sort of computers. Definitely remember burning CDs. But that's really cool. And so you mentioned getting into Python.
Yes.
At the risk, what do you think of Python as a language?
Oh my God, I've had so many experiences with this migrating to like Python 2 to 3. So I would say I like it as a language. It was my first one that I learned, and I think it's so, versatile and like especially in the space of data science. But I have a pain inside of me going through this migration. And
yeah,
so,
2 to 3.
yeah.
It was a big shift.
Yes.
2 to 3. Yeah, and I guess out of that time, you've obviously worked across all of these areas and done all these things. Which part really sort of takes your fancy, I guess?
Ooh, I would always say I always have a heart in engineering. I think to this day, I love still learning about kind of how are you building things and how are you connecting the dots. That's kind of a passion I will always have, but the product management side really stemmed from a frustration of wanting everybody to know the direction we're going and just that I think there's a word, there's this book about kind of a diminisher and a multiplier, and I would really like to say that I feel like I'm such a multiplier where I want everyone to be standing like side by side and we're going towards the same goal, and I just didn't feel that in every situation I was an engineer, so I think that's what I like.
It's definitely a challenge across that. I mean, I've been building businesses now for about 17 years, and at times when things are not feeling quite right, I kind of have that realization that perhaps, too much of the plan is in my head and not enough with other people, and really activating everybody's grey matter, into the topics and discussion. And it's always exciting seeing other people light up and sort of latch into ideas and really run with it as well. So I kind of am a big believer in that idea of trying to get highly engaged teams. And I think, your story there comes from a place of genuine passion for building. You want to create, which is really awesome to see. One of the things when we first started working together, you'd brought Raygun into your prior employer, and like I said at the kickoff, I think that relationship's been phenomenal, and in no small part because of the way that you ran that relationship. To be frank, I wish all our engagements went that well. Do you want to talk a little bit about your role there and how you operated and the way you looked at it?
Basically, as a product manager in infrastructure, I was indirectly connected to the customer. So I was mainly a platform supporting other teams' goals. And the concept of the product in that sense, I was always asking my bosses, I was like, what's the product? Like, what is my product? And it got to this part where it was, a lot of it was when we make decisions, we identify a problem, whether that's like, hey, there's a security risk, you have like these certifications you have to adhere to, your existing infrastructure tooling no longer supports that, you need to find something else. So that's like usually one of the drivers we had. And now you have to go for a search of what the product is look like and deciding kind of like, do I build, do I buy? And that's how we landed to Raygun. And my role there was really identifying kind of, and that's my team's role there, was identifying this relationship of like, I mean, this idea of kind of, do we build versus buy? If we buy, what are the options out there? And really bridging that gap and making sure that we're treating it as a product and you're coming in internally and you're going to get to market internally to the whole company. And we care about the adoption and the success of your product. So that's a long answer to explain. It was from ideation all the way to go to market in internal teams.
I still think that's a brilliant way of operating. I talk to a lot of organizations, and a fairly common thing, and I think a lot of our listeners will probably relate to this, is the organization that has like 10 of the same tool, and they have that view that, hey, we're going to buy this new tool and it's just going to make everything work. And that idea is obviously quite naive. You've got to build it into workflows and really make sure people are using it to get any value out of it. You can't go and buy a hammer and then complain that a house didn't appear, that sort of thing. And
exactly.
That was the pull that I kind of noticed when we were working with you, was that ability to really amplify the team's engagement with the product and make sure they were getting the value out of it, and not just having to guess or, like, no matter how much we focus on user experience, there's always something that confuses somebody, or something that doesn't quite work the way they would like it to. And that engagement and feedback cycle was super valuable to us. But it was a fantastic way of operating.
You also mentioned something there about this, like a lot of organizations end up having the same multiple tools doing the same thing. In an era right now where there's some macroeconomic conditions and tool consolidation that's really relevant to the picture. And I think like the role that I served at my previous company was really to prevent that from happening, where we should make conscious decisions when the problem is identified, evaluate all our options, and make sure whatever option we go with, that's the right option for this company, and we are in a place where we're ready to adopt it and really run with this company moving forward and treat it as a partner. Because I feel like we often would make decisions where we just need a tool to check the box. I found this company and it seems like it's the best one in the industry, or it's a new company that we can afford, and we just look at the surface, which is like, how much does it cost and how is it used widely by other companies? But you realize you really have your own use cases internally, and different people and different culture, and you need to be able to really treat it as like a search that you intentionally decide for the longevity of the company.
I 100% agree with that. One of the things that I really liked about the way we worked together as well was the connecting up through Slack.
Yes.
So, I think people can probably tell from the accent, we're based out of New Zealand, which is quite far from New York, where we're filming this at the moment. But being able to sort of quickly exchange messages like it was another team in the company was really cool. I found that fantastic. Did you see that sort of engagement with a lot of the vendors? Did you think it worked from your side? Maybe I thought it was great, but...
Yeah, so it definitely was amazing. Like, I think like having that direct connection to you was great. We were trying a bunch of different things, and whether like, do we put our vendors in a specific Slack space, or do we just enter their Slack space, or do they enter ours? And I think like it was a really important connection to have. At the same time, I think one party always had to carry the burden of like, whose Slack space are we picking? So yeah.
No, I thought it was great for being able to also connect in with the engineers, So I was in that channel. I could see the conversations, but you could also sort of go, hey, I think there was something around the Python SDK that we had, and being able to sort of go, let's just get the team member who works on the Python SDK to jump into the chat here and actually talk about it, so you can talk straight to the person working on it.
So I think there's always this kind of internal debate on how close do you want to get to your vendor, because what we did there was we gave you so much access to the team internally, and it's like in some cases you're like, at the end of the day, it's a sales team. It's like, are they just trying to figure out who to get the next renewal with? And there's definitely like those kind of thoughts that would run in your head. And I think the partnership we've had and your team at Raygun really just treated us like partners, and we're genuinely just curious, and we could feel it that you wanted to be involved and part of this journey and really had our success. And you mentioned like the Python SDK, and there's so much more to that one, where we would have an issue, and the next time I meet with someone on your team, it's like I would meet with Zhang and Risha, and they'd just be like, can we sit down and I want to understand your use case? And it wasn't just like a sales pitch. It was always like, I'm genuinely curious. How can I improve this product better? And that was really stemming from this direct connection we had through Slack.
It is funny because we talked a little bit before we kicked off the formally recording this about that dynamic. And you know, I'm an engineer by trade myself, and one of the things that I often see as a really big impediment is that a lot of engineers and broader software teams, you know, not just the engineers, they can quite often have that cynical view that every engagement is about, you know, an upgrade, a cross-sell, you know, an upsell, something going on like that. And yet that's why we like to build the relationships, is because we always felt that once somebody actually experienced, you know, genuine support, they kind of go, oh, okay, you know, like this is a trustworthy engagement to have. They're not just going to try and fleece us. And it kind of breaks my heart a little bit, because I feel like a lot of people in tech actually miss out on building those relationships, because look, I'm proud of what we're trying to do with it at Raygun, but I'm sure we're not unique in trying to build those type of relationships either.
Yes.
But we often find that a developer or something like that is not engaging, is getting frustrated, and we could have just said, well, it's actually over there, it's the answer, that sort of thing. How did you sort of experience that from yours? Because that was the thing. I felt like you were the real advocate on the other side there. Yeah.
So that's exactly my role. What it served was being one of the parts of the role was to really bridge that gap when we, even if it was an open source, self-managed, whatever you call it, like product, even if there was no vendor on the other side, at the end of the day, you're introducing a new tool, functionality, whatever you call it, that has to be used by the mass population. And maybe when you're a startup, you're still smaller in scale, you can afford that because it's easy to get everybody in the same room. It could fit in the same room and have an all hands and be like, here's a new tool, here's what I want you to do, and people can just really feel it. But as the company gets bigger and bigger, I've heard this from other vendors I've discussed, it's like you kind of have this issue with, who is the person who's using my tool? Who is the person who will pay for the tool? And who is the one, this issue of like building versus the one who's using it. So it's like the one building may be from the infrastructure team, but the one using it is going to be a developer. So I think the role that I served was really to serve as that middle point to make it easy for the vendor, and to always have an advocate internally, so that when, let's say, there's a change of guards and this person who used to sign is no longer the same person signing, you don't just get left in the dark, and now you're trying to figure out, who am I supposed to talk to? Who's going to sign the next renewal? So there's obviously the transactional piece of that, but there's also the relationship building aspect of this product we bought, we invested so much money. How can I make sure it's going to have a return on investment? And how can I quantify that to get buy-in across the board? And that was really the center of the role.
Yeah. And that sort of loops back a little bit, I find, to the, you sort of touched on it earlier, the consistency side of it, where, you know, if you talk to 10 engineers, you'll typically get 10 different opinions on how to do anything. And that's where actually kind of, especially as you say, as the team grows, saying, hey, no, this is just how we do it. And it might not be how an individual particularly wants to do it, but the consistency actually becomes the benefit within the team because they're all singing from the same hymn sheet. They all know this is the process to do things, and that can kind of keep the business moving smoothly.
Correct.
Versus if you have 3 of the same sort of tool trying to do the same thing, trying to remember it. I often find just purely simplifying everything makes life easier in an organization.
But also it's like when I think it's just undeniable that as companies grow, which is good, and as you grow your employees, you start having, there's like this need for some level of standardization. And I think sometimes it can get lost really easily if we don't think about that as we grow. And also, like you mentioned, it's like there's this concept in a lot of the teams where, well, I'm an engineer, I'm in DevOps, I'm in infrastructure, I'm building a tool for another engineer. I could assume what they need.
Yep.
And it's like, well, no. Your use case is not the same as their use case. And we need to understand what are they trying to do? What's the job that they have to do versus what's the job you have to do? And it's not always the same thing. You're not in there every day. Like you mentioned, it's like as a company grows, you really need to prepare for that scale and being upfront with and direct and having those difficult conversations on these are the use cases that I have. This is the need for the business. This is like an audit I have to pass. We can't have 10 tools. We have to settle on one, and someone has to give their way.
Yes, yep, 100%. One of the things that we've been doing on this trip. So, for background, I last caught up with Kyra about 6 months ago. Is it now?
Yeah.
Out here, had a great meal. It was great. And we talked about what were some of the things to improve in Raygun, and I had sort of at that point traveled across the United States meeting with a number of our larger customers and sort of hearing what are some things we can improve. And this trip is kind of, I think of it as the accountability trip. It's the one where I've been turning up to the same customers and saying, right, you told me this last time, it's now shipped. It's in the product, let me demo it to you. And we've shipped about 10 things, feature, capability enhancements, whatever you want to call them. And I found that really, really like a powerful motivating force to kind of go, okay, well, I have to have the accountability of turning up and saying I actually delivered on what you told me last time. Because that's like flipping the script to the vendor side, right? Once you have a lot of customers and you're trying to sort of keep everybody happy, you can run into the challenges that everybody does have a different use case. I was quite fortunate on that last trip that when we sort of aggregated all of the feedback, I was like, there's a lot of overlap here, which was great. It kind of showed a fair bit of consistency across how they were thinking of using the Raygun products. Now, in your role, you've shifted over to Sysdig.
Yes.
And you're now a little bit more on a vendor side of things. How have you been finding that as different from your prior role?
Yeah. Well, when I was in my prior role, it was in the business to consumer side, and infrastructure there was different than now I'm in the business to business space. And actually what triggered me to take this leap of faith in my career was really the relationship we've built. And I was like, I just want to be on the other side. Because I remember I was talking to you and the team, and like, here's a feature that is missing, and I want this. This is how it's going to fix a problem. And I was like, why am I on? I want to be on the other side.
The engineer coming out.
Yes, I was like, I'll be on the other side and do it for this company. So it was a sigh of relief when I managed to make that jump. And it's really interesting to see from the people building it on the other side and just witnessing how much we actually care so much about our customers. Because in the consumer side, it's like one person, so you kind of have to aggregate so much of the information. And we still do that to some extent, like trying to figure out where are they touching, what's the touch points, how often are they using this? Like, we still have those in like a feature level, but as a whole, it was like, I feel like my role previously was a little bit detached from the business, and here it's like I was like, if an infrastructure team that feels so close to the customer, like you realize how much the team really cares so much about the business and where we're going, and how my team's eyes just light up when they're like, we want to do this next, and this is the next big thing we're going to do for the company. And you as an infrastructure team, we know how we're directly impacting that, and that was always something I needed. And I love the feeling of seeing how much we truly care about our customers.
Yep. I concur with that. And the thing that I've found really effective, and it kind of ties into that relationship that we had built, was the connection through to the engineers. We have a wonderful CS team, absolutely phenomenal. But one of the things we really also push is that idea that the engineers themselves, should be engaging with the customers. And obviously our industry is highly dominated by introverted personality types, so it isn't always internally embraced as much as maybe the extroverted team members do, but I think it's so important for building that connection and empathy. And even on this trip, I've been sending feedback from each of the meetings with customers on, hey, this is how that feature you just delivered landed, and I think as a technical person, knowing somebody's loving the work you did, that kind of completes the circle.
Yes, and that's a very important thing you point there, because I think when my idea was like, it's an infrastructure team, like it's always this feeling of like, I'm just empowering others. It's not my goal. I came to this role and I'm like, whoa, like there's so much we can do here. And you mentioned it's like when you start to when you sign that contract and you're like, okay, we're partners now, we have your tool, you actually don't really just have access to the direct sales team. Mm-hmm. Those teams are still talking internally and finding a person to leverage. And sometimes it's like and I experienced this firsthand with Raygun, where, like I mentioned, we have a meeting and it's like, oh, it's not the salesperson I was talking to, it's now their VP of product in front of me. It's no longer that person. Now I have like the whole product team and someone from their engineering team. It was as easy as like asking for a data dump. Yeah. Because we were trying to track our migration, and I was like, oh, I thought the relationship just kept growing. And that's really what I'm seeing as well. You mentioned from like the vendor side, where I'm like, the amount of empathy we truly have for the customer. And before I joined a software vendor, I would always ask a lot of software vendors out of just me not knowing. I'd be like, an example would be like, Raygun, how do you monitor Raygun? And then they'd always be like, I use my own product. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, how does that work? And now seeing that and like really just being able to see how much we truly care, and just we experience it firsthand, so we also feel how our customers feel.
Yes, yep. we definitely use Raygun to monitor parts of Raygun. We do use some external monitoring as well, only because you do run into that scenario where it's like, well, if it all went down,
just for your
how
own,
would I know? But for the most part, like all the errors are flowing through Raygun. We use our RUM product to track our websites, and the more you sort of dog food your own product, the better it is. But that feedback from the external parties is important, because I find, like some of the things that people were asking for on that last trip were like, as soon as somebody would say it, you'd be like, oh, of course, because we no longer have the beginner's eyes, right?
Yeah.
We've been working on these things for years and improving them, and that can also be a bit of a blind spot, not out of any desire to not ship a feature. You've just trained yourself so much on how to use the product. So once you start hearing people say this, and this, it's such an important piece.
Yeah, I'll also take that in another perspective, where coming from the DevOps side, the platform engineer, whatever you call it, infrastructure, oftentimes those engineers are the customers of the product we're building. Mm-hmm. And the feedback from the customer actually also helps us get our needs prioritized, because it's like a validation that you're getting from externally of like, oh, like they need that. Well, I also need that. I've been waiting for that. Maybe we could have a conversation here. Or it is also this partnership of like, happen all the time in my previous role. We would have initiatives we would launch internally. It's like, well, we bought this new observability tool and we want to launch like an SLO initiative, but we don't know where to start. And we would just ask the vendor, be like, can we look at your SLOs to some extent, or like, can I talk to your infrastructure team? And the amount of knowledge that the vendor actually has is so much, because you see so many companies, and that's kind of what I'm saying. It's like you're actually benefiting as well from your relationship, because you're learning internally of how to also operate your things and how to leverage your product better, and what could be missing that you've been asking for, but you need that support, and the vendors can do that.
I often feel like the tech industry actually feels more like the tech community.
Yes.
On some of these customer meetings, these have been much larger organizations, and just to talk about AI for a second, one of the things we've been doing at Raygun internally is we've been building this smallish GPU cluster, but running models internally on our own business data, not our customers' data.
Just to clarify.
Just to explore it in there and seeing, what can we do with this? What sort of capabilities could we do to enhance our business? And with some of these larger organizations where they're probably a little bit more risk adverse, I've been saying to them, look, hey, I know you're a customer, but when your team maybe starts looking at this, like give us a yell. We'll jump on a call for an hour or two with a couple of the people on the team that have played with stuff at our end. Let's just compare the notes. I love that sort of exchange that can occur as well, just for knowledge sharing, because we often, as a vendor, you are learning a lot from the customer, and you're getting the benefit. They're actually paying you for that, which is amazing. But being able to give a little back as well through that community side, I think is a really awesome part of our industry. It's not, there's certainly, cutthroat competition maybe directly between competing companies, but I'm unsure that a direct competitor would become one of your customers as such. But therefore the community side really does work well.
Yes, and I wish people would leverage that more and not just see it as like a transaction. It's like, and you mentioned earlier, it's like there's this expectation sometimes that you buy something and it's just going to magically do it. It's not the truth, and that's why there's some art into that as well, of how you're going to create the adoption plan, how to get everybody on the same page. But it is a community, and you have teams to leverage, because even from the vendor side, you're experiencing what your customers are experiencing, and you can leverage your knowledge to also figure out how do you drive this internally. And I from my previous job, I really leverage so much of the knowledge that my vendors have. I just would love to just catch up and be like, how do you do this? Or even be like, I don't know if you could share this, but can you tell me how another customer did it? I know you've seen another customer do it. So it's really that community that you're mentioning that a vendor can bridge so much.
Yes, yep. I still remember when we very first launched Raygun crash reporting many, many years ago now, and one of the earliest users, this guy sent me this email, and he said, I love this product because I outsource all my dev. I'm not really a technical guy, but I want to make sure the quality is good. So I just mandate that they put Raygun in there, and I can see any of the faults that are occurring and put in there. I was like, gosh, that's a use case I wouldn't have thought of. I was thinking, again, from the viewpoint of an engineer, kind of going, well, I want to be able to debug performance issues and bugs way faster and deliver fixes. I hadn't even thought about the non-technical user wanting to actually just kind of understand the quality of things. So getting those extra perspectives was quite eye-opening overall, which was really cool.
Yeah, and I think that was also something that I was trying to really leverage internally when we did get Raygun, because I think sometimes that's the use case. You're like, this is a tool for engineers and engineers only, but there's so much more use cases to that. Obviously there's the leadership aspect, but there's always this contention. It's like a kind of controversial topic sometimes, where they're like product managers do not focus on reliability, blah blah. But I'm like, well, we care about the data. It's not that we don't care, we just want to see the data.
Yes.
So if you can, and I did this in my experience, where you open up these observability tools and you open them up and you're like, you want to see how you're meeting your SLOs, or how many crashes that occurred recently, or how many pages your engineer received. And once you have that data put somewhere in a dashboard, or even just a simple chart, you will get someone to care and just be like, whoa, this is a problem, maybe I should understand better. And it's really being able to use these tools to be a communicator between also those different roles in technology, to make them see the same thing at once, and really visibility and leveraging that data. And that's really a use case that I also got to see so much when I was in previous company and the role that I had, and I was like, no one, like, I was like, it's not that people don't care. It's just like you need to explain and show the data.
Yep. Help them understand how
Yes,
they're
help
going
them
to fix
understand.
things. I was recently, I read through the Elon Musk biography and by Walter Isaacson. And there's a fascinating chapter where it talked about trying to fix the Fremont factory. It was producing 2,000 cars a week. They needed to get to 5,000. And this was when they had their production hell time. And it's actually a fascinating chapter. It relates, I think, a lot to what you're talking about here, because they discuss getting all of the monitoring in place, and they talk about walking to the red. Basically, every single point in the production line, would have a light, and if it went red, it meant there was a block there. And that was the way that they relentlessly improved the way that the machine worked. The factory was just walk to the red light, figure out what the problem was, make the improvement, and just repeat that over and over and over again. And on that sort of continuum with these sorts of tools, I often think of it as like the maturity scale is, first you have nothing, second you have something but you don't really do anything with it, then the third one is you're doing a little bit, and then finally full maturity is absolutely running at the problems, and making sure you unblock everything. And you can kind of create a much more streamlined overall delivery process by just relentlessly removing and fixing the problems. And I think we kind of often think in terms of projects, like, okay, well, we're going to do 2 weeks of, bug bashing, and then it's like done, or we're going to go and launch this feature, so the team aren't going to necessarily prioritize code fixes and things like that. But I just find that whole dynamic quite interesting to think of it as a factory setting. How do we make our engineering teams more effective to help our customers ultimately?
Correct. And also, I think there's that data you mentioned, the data that comes from Raygun or other tools, that is data from the customer in some way, where that's their experiences. Those are the cries that are not visible. So those are still there's still something they're struggling with, that you have like this really deep understanding of what they're going through. And so being able to really leverage that data and opening that up to the whole company so that everybody cares about it. And I really think that was one of my kind of vision for the observability team, was kind of like leveraging that data to make everybody care, and not just make it a tool where, well, I got paged at night, this is the tool I'm going to go to figure out how to resolve it. Okay, that's definitely a major use case, and the main use case oftentimes that we purchase these tools. But also after that, okay, let's put that out there and see, like, how can we in the long term get rid of that? Maybe there is a technical way of fixing that, but maybe it's a bigger problem that we're trying to solve, and getting people to prioritize this type of the data that it's showing. So yeah, totally agree with you.
One of the dynamics that I've seen exhibited in some of our most successful customers, and to put that in context, it would be one of our customers is PushPay, and they were one of the fastest companies to $1 billion in market cap. And they were bubbling up the details early on in their startup journey all the way to the board. The board would have in their board pack the number of errors that were occurring in the system, and so there was entire buy-in from literally the absolute top to the bottom of, like, actually, these are all things that are annoying our customers. We need to make sure that this isn't an ongoing issue, and make sure that we care. But I often see a challenge that sometimes the quality of the software actually is disconnected from outside of the engineering team. Maybe it doesn't have full executive buy-in, perhaps across teams as well. The CTO might care, but do the other executives in the organization understand it? And one of the challenges there is I don't even know, even though, look, you and I, giant nerds, and so I do mean that as a compliment. But it's kind of like in digital technology, this is your storefront. This is, and a line I remember from university talking about user interface design was like to the user, the interface is the system. So if you've got a digital product, and it's crashing or it's slow, it's very difficult to build a successful business. And I often use the analogy of, like, would Ray Kroc have managed to build McDonald's up if every third burger had rancid meat in it? I might have even used that one with you before.
Yes. It's really like, I feel like we're getting so impatient as well with everything, and,
Yes.
everything that's so easy to get these days through technology, which is, I'm so grateful. But oftentimes, because of how easily accessible things are, we're also very impatient. So you mentioned, it's like, well, if this thing keeps crashing, I'm so tired of this, and I'm not even going to revisit it.
Yep.
And that definitely applies. I've had experiences where we've had tools where the queries would take like over 5 seconds to load, and you're here like maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds, or you're waiting for a whole dashboard to load, and you're like, I'm in an incident. I'm just trying to fix this, and like I cannot wait for a query to load for this long.
Yep.
And I think oftentimes it's like you mentioned, it's like speed and the quality is so important, and
Yes.
that is just something that needs to be more highlighted. And it's not always about kind of this concept of like, how can we make it even better? Well, if it's not even standing in the first place,
Yep.
it's
Exactly.
not going to get any better than that.
Well, I mean, this tour that I'm on at the moment, it's a good
Yeah.
example. I went to book my first car with Avis, and the site errored out when I was looking for the car. So I was like, okay, well, I'll go to the budget website, and I looked for a car, and I actually got the same error. And then I was like, that's right, Budget and Avis are the same company. You know, they've got the same bug in their website that's not working. So I ended up having to go and rent a car from Hertz. And now I'm going through about 8 or 9 states on this trip. And it's like, well, Hertz is getting all my money
Yeah.
because of a software fault, you know, and, and one thing in the Avis and Budget website, you know. And you sit there wondering, at that scale, you're like, how much is this damaging these organizations at times? I just don't know that perhaps the chief executive or whoever really can drive change is even aware of how much they can be bleeding without knowing. You know?
The awareness piece is so important, and that's truly something that I carry so much in what I do, being more an internal facing product manager, is I want to make sure that there's visibility from that level. And it doesn't have to come from me, it could come from anyone, but everything that's happening, the tools that you're owning, how are you leveraging that and translating that to make it consumable by your executives? Because we talked earlier about kind of this adoption and making sure everyone's on the same page, engineers to engineers, expectations. But at the end of the day, there's always this missing piece of your executive level, like your leadership needs to also care.
Yes.
And how do you make them care? Because at the end of the day, they need to care to make those decisions across the board and influence other teams to unblock you for whatever reason. And we mentioned, it's like, how do you make that level of not granularity, but the opposite of granularity, and like aggregating the data to make it relevant for them and explaining it, and like, hey, this one exception error in Raygun is actually happening 1 million times, which means our customers cannot do XYZ, or our engineers are doing XYZ to make it hurt, you know?
Yep, absolutely.
and then that eventually trickles down and like solving that problem, and hopefully that website figured it out, or they need to get on Raygun.
Yeah, hopefully. It's absolutely true. Getting that sort of understanding in there. It's one area that I'm hopeful in the sort of emerging age of AI, and being able to sort of perhaps, you know, mass summarize information. And that's part of another area that we've been looking at Raygun.
Yes.
This is actually something that's going out to customers, should be out by the time this is live, which is an AI error resolution capability. So you take an error and you can get an explanation of what the fault was, you know, in a much more simplified term. Because we also get a lot of feedback from folks who say, look, I'm in Raygun, but I might not be like the nerdiest nerd in the team. I just want to know, like, is this actually an issue, or is this benign? You know, that's the other challenge at times, is, you know, some things aren't really impacting people and some absolutely are, you know. And I know Zeng, when you spoke with her, you know, she often talks about setting up for particularly, say, e-commerce customers, you know, a specific application just for the checkout. It's like, you know, you do not want your checkout to not be working. That will hurt the company immediately. You know, set that to critical levels of alert. Anything that happens, wake us up. But bring it back to the other end, which is just helping you understand what's really going on in the system. And obviously, with these telemetry type tools, there's a lot of data. You know,
Yes, the data is just, you go from like, I think you go so much from this, I need the data, And then you end up being like, there's too much data. What do I do with it? And that's what you mentioned, like this with AI. I'm so excited about that feature, and like so many companies, like my own, like the company I work for, we're also doing so much with AI, and it's really exciting how it really speeds up so much of these things that anyone, because I feel like sometimes as well, like it could be me, it could be someone else, and you're like, I don't know how to navigate this tool. Maybe you may have the best UI ever, and it's so easy, but it's like you're just like, I don't want to learn something new again. There's so many buttons, and you're like, I just want to like Command F find the answer.
Yeah, pretty much.
In this page or something like that, or Google search it, but it doesn't show up on Google as a different tool. And like, I really excited because like AI can do that and just really tell you, here's what's important, and here's what you should care about, without maybe not asking someone and be like, hey, I don't know how to use this. I'm so sorry. Really, like with the query languages, I feel like so many tools have their own query languages these days, and that can definitely just speed up so much and not having to learn another language.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ability to bring in so much data and connect the dots. This is one of the things, like with the large language models, is that they can take two discrete things that maybe a human might not even necessarily connect, unless maybe they're a 150 IQ type person, and draw an insight from that. And to talk about one of our largest customers in the past was HBO, and we tracked through our Run product the finale of Game of Thrones and eras, but they didn't have that many eras. But they had I think we peaked at 83 million concurrent viewers was streaming their like load time, buffering time, all that sort of information through the platform, which was, to the fellow nerds listening, was a really fun scaling challenge, kind of watching all of our dashboards for that. But at the end of the day, that's more than 83 million data points, because that's a whole lot of data every few seconds from all of those people. And then can you look at all of that and actually pull things out? And we've all, maybe I'm just the old man who yells at clouds here, but like whenever I see anomaly detection, I don't really trust anomaly detection, the historic ones, because I always felt I was getting as many false positives as I was getting positives, and in particular the length of time. A good example we used to see was like Black Friday, Cyber Monday cycles, and it's like, actually not too many anomaly detection systems are saying, well, this is normal for this time of year. It's more like going, well, last week the traffic was half of this. Something's
going on.
Not right here. But these systems that can now bring in so much more data and start to infer things, as well as apply common sense knowledge, I think is really going to be a game changer for how quickly can I figure out why something happened.
Yes, exactly. And also something I truly have so much heart in as well is more like, whenever we buy a product internally, how can we maximize it that even your engineer that just graduated college can use it?
Yes.
And I noticed, like in my experience, where oftentimes it's like the engineering managers have to take time to train them on how to use these tools, because from someone who studied computer science, they don't necessarily teach us how to use tools to debug we just print and then you're just trying to figure it out, and then or like these are not something you would usually learn in school, and now you have to go through on-call, and you're like freaking out because you're like, okay, like how do I parse through so much data? And even then it's like getting to this momentum of using a tool, and there's still some learning curve on top of that, having to learn a new workplace and this new era of your life. And having AI, I think, could just really maximize so much of your resources, and really leveraging that to empower everyone across the board to be more efficient. And you don't always have to invest in the most, people who have so much experience in a certain tool, and could be opened up for more.
Yep. Well, I kind of do think a little bit of AI is almost like a new type of interface. It's a new channel in effect for working with things. One of the things I've always been proud of with Raygun is, and I hope this was how you experienced it, was a reasonably intuitive interface. And I remember when we first launched, we haven't had complaints about this in a long time, but when we very first launched, I remember somebody being like, this interface feels a bit Fisher-Price. And I was like, yeah, but Fisher-Price is understandable to a 2-year-old. Like, this is for software engineers, so everybody can figure out what the heck is going on. And I've always wanted to kind of hold on to that element of be easy to use. I remember this other customer of ours was when we were first launching our rum product. And this guy was looking at it, and he's like, I really like this. I was like, what do you like the most about it? And he was like, well, it's just so intuitive that we actually have to keep 2 people employed just to train people on the current rum tool. He's like, but this one, it's like, it's really clear where you go, and that's something I've often felt is actually a challenge when selling and building tools for technical audiences. We kind of have a natural love for lots of data and density of information. But as you say, when you're onboarding and ramping up, until you're an expert user, you don't want it to be confusing and hard to use.
Yes, exactly. And I think there's also so much of, you mentioned, like having to make a couple people prioritize that, and that's all that they do, so that they become this subject matter expert across the whole company and educate the whole company on how to use a certain tool. And what happens when you lose that person? Does that also mean Raygun loses its value because now no one can teach it? So having such an intuitive platform that's easy to use and can just make sense. And like you mentioned, Raygun, the UI was just so easy. For me, it was my first time also seeing Raygun, and I was like, whoa, like this is incredible. And the only one where I was like, what is breadcrumbs? Like, and then I was like, oh, it's breadcrumbs. But it's kind of like, once you kind of understand it, it was just so simple, and your team was also able to provide so much, like some videos and support and being able to do that, and it was great. It was like in every application. I also think sometimes like there's this level of I think oftentimes as well you're limiting everyone's ability to make it into a service. Like I think that maybe someone from the DevOps team has to be the one enabling certain things to be on the tool. And what I really liked about Raygun was we still had their view internally for like the cost and all these things, but externally each team really had ownership of what they had. And it just took so much of the burden from my team, because we just can't put a person in there to be the one slicing and dicing it. And it was just that was really just nice to be able to really empower every single team engineer, and the amount of dedication that your team had for whenever you were talking to me about kind of really being so careful about the divisions and how teams were allocated to certain things. And those are just the things that makes life so simple, that we may be like, well, I would rather you fix how you explain this certain crash report, but in reality those were like those little pains that end up becoming so painful because it's not as intuitive as what you imagine it to be.
So by the end of next week, we'll have a tip in there explaining what breadcrumbs are.
I love that.
That's my main takeaway. Interview. No.
That's so amazing. I love that. That's my only feedback. I did not know what breadcrumbs was.
And for listeners, it's the idea that when an exception occurs, we will have automatically collected events that occurred leading up to that. So if it was a web page, it might be all of the clicks that the user had taken in a much higher resolution, right down to the element, which thing did they click, what AJAX calls were firing. And part of that was because we didn't want to run into a situation where you, say, have an exception and you go, well, why is that happening? But then you didn't realize that maybe 3 seconds earlier an AJAX call failed, that if that hadn't loaded state, this was going to blow up. But absolutely, breadcrumbs, yes, it's a bit of a funny name.
Yes. I'll call it another thing that I really loved about Raygun was I just feel like you maybe knew that we were going to end up having this macroeconomic condition one day, because there was always a feature of like permanently ignore, and the amount of times that I leveraged that was amazing, just to control the cost. And it was just really nice to see that, because I always felt like there's so much care and thought that you put into the product. Like, these people don't want to keep spending money on me, and like embracing that and being like, this is still
There's actually
cost.
a really interesting dichotomy in here, which is that we get a lot of, it's almost 50-50 across the customer base, which is the 50% that think that the monitoring should stop the second that budget's used up, and that makes sense. I can totally empathize with that. We got a fixed budget. I don't like surprise bills. And then the other half, which is like, well, the last thing I would want to turn off automatically would be a monitoring system, and so they would be really upset if anything was to stop processing data. And so we often get people that will say, can you make this happen? And so we have built a lot of features to try to help people manage those volumes. And I won't name this company, and the guy's a good friend of mine, but I remember what'll happen is, if somebody has really got a runaway error, let's say something, and I'll give you an example of a runaway error, and this was not the use case here, but I remember one time there was a popular website where they had this animation when you moved the cursor around, this little thing would chase it, and it was throwing a JavaScript error on every mouse move event for every single user. And so all of the stuff's coming in, and we see this sort of load uptick, and initially we kind of go, hey, you're getting alerts, you're getting all the things you've configured, the alarm bell should be going off, the team should jump in and engage. Not every customer does, right? It kind of keeps running, and we're like, ooh, well, that's going to start running up the bill, in a pretty big way.
Yes.
If that's left like that, if you've got an uncapped usage model in play. And so we'll typically, under that scenario, be emailing out through CS. Our finance team will be emailing, these things. So you don't have to just be a large customer to get CS support. They're usually looking over all of the data usage.
Yeah.
And my friend goes, oh, it's great. He goes, I don't mind that happening, because he goes, that to me is the executive alerting system. When the bill gets too high that it gets on our radar, we know we have a software quality problem, and we go and work on it. And I was like, that's an interesting way to think about the bill shock, executive alerting system. But it is a big problem though, for again, the different use cases across different businesses and how they'll look at it. The permanently ignored feature is a popular one. About last time we checked, I think it was about 80% of all errors are permanently ignored by people.
My God.
So there's a lot of like, I'm gonna fix this up, later. But it is a powerful feature, so people do love it. Kyra, I really appreciate your time today. We are running a little bit up against the clock, but it's been a real pleasure. Is there anything else you'd like to share today, just on either your experiences, how you're going in your new job? How's everything going?
Everything's going great. I just truly learned so much from the relationship that we've built in my previous company, and getting to really want to be part of this world. Yeah. And I just so glad as well for the friendship that we've developed as a result of that, and really just proof that it's more than a transaction.
Yeah. I still remember I think one of our first calls, and it was a few years back now with COVID, and I think it was the one where I had Henry, our 2-year-old son, and they're waving to you, and
there was definitely it got to a point where I was like, I'm taking a call at 10 p.m. my time to talk to Raygun CEO. It's just but it was like a really just amazing bond that we've just built through that, and just really appreciative of that, and getting to meet you guys here, and that you always look for me when I'm here.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
So much.
And thank you very much for listening, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.